So, you want to learn how to draw in perspective. You want to know how to draw characters and backgrounds that have depth. Don't even worry about it. I got you. What up YouTube, it's your boy Double M and I'm coming back at you with another tutorial where I teach you how to draw in perspective. Perspective. Wait, do we even know what perspective means? Like, ask yourself, what does perspective? You know what? Let's go and search it up. Perspective, the art of representing 3D objects on a 2D surface so as to give the right impression of their height, width, depth, and position in relation to each other. So to simply understand it, we're talking about presenting 3D objects on a 2D surface. And for these 3 dimensions, there are 3 axes that help us properly draw the shape in these 3 dimensions. For width, you have the x-axis. For height, you have the y-axis. And for depth, you have the z-axis. Now, I know it sounds like a lot of math talk, but wait, hear me out. Understanding this now will help us greatly for the rest of the video. So trust me, I'm not trying to trigger any PTSD. And for those that are still going through it, know that you're not alone. Know that we salute you. So yeah, we have the 3 axes for the 3 dimensions. These axes are also used to determine the position of the 3D object that you are drawing. If your object is moving up and down, there's movement along the y-axis. If your object is moving left and right, there's movement along the x-axis. This up, down, left, right movement is movement in the first 2 dimensions. And since we're on a 2D surface, the size of your object doesn't really change. It stays the same until it moves closer or further away. This is movement in the 3rd dimension, depth. There's a reason why closer things look bigger and things that are further away look smaller. They're tied to what's known as a vanishing point. Now, this is the first terminology when drawing in perspective. This is an imaginary point where things that when getting closer looks like it's coming from that point, and for things that are going further away vanish into that point. As a 3D shape, the box is the best shape to use when drawing in perspective because it makes it easier to see and use these vanishing points. Like the axes, there is height, width, and depth in the box as a 3D shape. Now, these vanishing points are usually tied to what's known as a horizon line. This is the second terminology when working with perspective. This is a line where the sky meets the ground, usually in the center of the page or the canvas. But when this line is near the top of the page, you are seeing more of the ground than the sky. So in reality, the camera is up looking down on the ground. Exact same for the opposite. If the line is closer to the bottom of the page or the canvas, you are seeing more sky than the ground. So in reality, the camera is closer to the ground looking up into the sky. This line is usually in the center of the page. It can be up, it can be down, it can even be tilted. It's up to you as the artist. And again, your vanishing points are usually tied to this line, attached to this line. Yes, I said points, because when drawing, you don't have to stick to using only 1 vanishing point. You can use 2, 5, you can even use 25, but let's start slow, baby steps with the 1-point perspective. All right, grab your pencil and paper. We're gonna go through this together. So start by plotting your vanishing point right in the center of the page. You can also put down the horizon line, but you don't really have to for the 1-point perspective. You can keep it there, or you can skip this step, doesn't really matter. All right, so now what I want you to do is draw your box. Again, for 1-point perspective, we only have 1 dimension, depth, that is tied to this vanishing point. So the other 2 dimensions, width and height, are going to be drawn normally. Your horizontal lines are just going to be kept horizontal and your vertical lines are going to be kept vertical. Now what I want you to do is to show that depth in perspective. From the corners of this box, draw lines right to the vanishing point. This shows how depth, one of the 3 dimensions, is attached to this vanishing point, to this single vanishing point. Now, these are just guidelines. That's not actually how long your box is. We're looking at the front face of the box right now. We need to draw the back end of the box with a horizontal line and a vertical line. Draw the back end of the box and erase the rest of the lines that connect to the vanishing point, which then leaves you with a box that is drawn in 1-point perspective. So that's how to understand drawing objects in 1-point perspective. Of the 3 dimensions, only 1 dimension is tied to this single vanishing point: depth. Height and width are kept vertical and horizontal, but the depth of the shape is tied to this single vanishing point with guidelines. Let's draw another box. Start with a square or a rectangle. It's up to you. Now from that rectangle, draw guidelines from the corners of that rectangle to the vanishing point. Then draw the backside of this rectangle, of this cube, and erase the rest of the guidelines to have your 3D shape in a 1-point perspective. Now we move on to the next. What I want you to do is draw your horizon line and draw 2 vanishing points, one on the left side and one on the right side, attached to this horizon line. Now remember, with 1-point perspective, you have one of the 3 dimensions attached to a vanishing point. Now that we're working with 2-point perspective with 2 vanishing points, we have 2 dimensions attached to a vanishing point. Each vanishing point has their own dimension attached to it. We have depth going that way and we have width going that way. Again, these are just guidelines. You want to draw the edges of the box to draw the actual size of the box and then erase the rest of the guidelines to have your box in 2-point perspective. It's usually from 2-point perspective onwards where things can get a bit challenging, especially when you're drawing in perspective for the first time as a beginner. So to help you with drawing shapes in these point perspectives, 2 points and onwards, what you want to draw is coming from these vanishing points. You want to draw perspective lines. Now that's the third terminology, working with perspective. Now let's draw another box. Whenever drawing in these perspectives, even with 1-point perspective, but especially with 2-point perspective, what I like to do is I like to draw the edges that are not attached to a vanishing point first. So in this case, it's only height that is not attached to a vanishing point. So it's just vertical lines going upwards. And then for the lines that are attached to the vanishing point, I draw them from these vertical lines connecting to that vanishing point that they are attached to. All right, let's attack the 3-point perspective. Start with a horizon line and then the first 2 of the 3 vanishing points, put them on the horizon line like you did for 2-point perspective. The third point is not on the horizon line, usually at the top or the bottom. It's up to you. For now, let's put it at the bottom. Now what you want to do is draw perspective lines, guidelines coming from these vanishing points. Now we said with 1-point perspective, you have one of the 3 dimensions attached to a vanishing point. And 2-point, you have 2 dimensions tied to their own vanishing points. With 3-point perspective, all 3 dimensions are tied to a vanishing point. So using these guidelines, these perspective lines coming from these vanishing points, you want to draw your cube. So for height, width, and depth, each dimension are coming from these vanishing points, following the lines coming from these vanishing points. And with a complete cube, you should erase the rest of the guidelines to have your cube in that point perspective, in that view of that point perspective. Again, going over the importance of that horizon line. If your cube or your shape is underneath that horizon line, you're going to see the top of that cube. If the shape is above the horizon line, you're going to see the bottom of that shape. But if your shape is right on that horizon line, you're not going to see the top or the bottom. And that's 3-point perspective. Now, before we get to the big dogs, I want you to drop a like if you enjoyed the video so far. And while you're down there, hit that subscribe button, become part of the Double Empire. Get more videos like these. All right, now we're moving to 4-point perspective. Draw your horizon line and draw your vanishing points. 2 of them being on the horizon line and the other 2 being one being at the top of the page and one being at the bottom of the page. Now you may be thinking to yourself, if all 3 dimensions were attached to all 3 vanishing points in 3-point perspective, is there a 4th dimension that attaches to the 4th vanishing point? Do we have to find the 4th dimension to attach to that 4th vanishing point? This is too much thinking just to draw. No, No, we do not need to go that far. Again, we are representing 3D objects on a 2D surface. With that extra vanishing point, we're just having fun playing around with how we can represent these 3 dimensions of the 3D object on the 2D surface. Alright, so now that you have your 4 vanishing points for your 4-point perspective, from the 2 vanishing points on the horizon line, draw straight lines as perspective lines, as guidelines to help you out. Now, in between the top and the bottom vanishing point, what you want to do is draw curved converging lines from the top vanishing point to the bottom vanishing point. Now, of these converging curved guidelines, the one that's in the middle is going to be straight, but the ones that are on the sides are going to have more curve the further you go from the center. You are still going to draw the cube as you would with the other point perspectives in this 4-point perspective following this guideline. It's just that for the dimension that is in between the 2 vanishing points that have these converging curved lines, in this case it's height, you are going to draw the height of that cube following the curved guidelines in between the top and the bottom vanishing point. For depth, you still have the straight line going to that vanishing point, and for width, you still have the straight line going to that vanishing point. But for height, you're following the curved converging lines in between the top and bottom vanishing points. Alright, now we come to 5-point perspective. Draw the horizon line and draw the first 4 vanishing points the way you would for 4-point perspective. 2 of them being on the horizon line and 2 of them being not on the horizon line, one at the top and one at the bottom. Now, in a way, 5-point perspective is similar to 4-point perspective. In 4-point perspective, in between the top and bottom vanishing point, you had these converging curved lines. Only between the top and the bottom in 4-point perspective. In 5-point perspective, you're going to have these curved converging lines in between the top and bottom vanishing point and in between the left and right vanishing point. So you got converging lines in between the top and bottom vanishing point and in between the left and right vanishing point, almost forming this orb of guidelines, this sphere of guidelines. And then that 5th point is put right in the center with straight perspective guidelines coming from that 5th point in the center in all directions. Now wait, don't get discouraged, don't get demotivated. These are just the guidelines. It may look complex, but it's not that difficult to understand once you get the hang of it, and it won't take that long to get the hang of it. If you think about it, in a way, 5-point perspective is very similar to 1-point perspective. I know you may be confused, but let me explain. In 1-point perspective, you have one of the 3 dimensions, depth, that is attached to this single vanishing point. So for the other 2 dimensions, height and width, you just draw straight lines, horizontal lines for how wide your box was and vertical lines for how tall your box was. However deep your box was, you draw lines attached to that vanishing point for depth. In 5-point perspective, it's sort of the same. It's just that instead of in 1-point perspective of drawing a straight line for width and a straight line for height, in 5-point perspective, from the left vanishing point to the right vanishing point, following the curved converging guideline, you would draw the width of your cube, and for the height, you would draw from the bottom vanishing point to the top vanishing point, following the curved converging guideline, draw how tall this box is, and for depth would be attached to that 5th vanishing point right in the center. Those are just the guidelines once again. Wanting to draw the height, you would follow the converging lines in between the top and bottom vanishing point, and wanting to draw the width, you would follow the converging lines in between the left and right vanishing point. Once you get to practice in these guidelines a number of times, you start to get it. However wide your cube is, follow the guidelines, the converging guidelines from the left vanishing point to the right vanishing point. However tall your cube is, follow the converging guidelines from the bottom vanishing point to the top vanishing point. And however deep your cube goes, you would draw along the straight guidelines coming from that fifth point right in the center for the depth of your cube. So just get used to drawing cubes in these guidelines for your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 point perspectives, and you'll get it. Now, what I want you to do as an exercise is to study pictures and backgrounds, the perspective in pictures and backgrounds, and draw over these pictures and backgrounds, drawing the horizon line, vanishing points, and perspective lines that are coming from these vanishing points. And whatever objects are in these pictures, draw them as boxes that are attached to these different point perspectives, whether it's 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, whatever it may be. Doing enough of this exercise, you start to realize that you have edges that are converging to a vanishing point, but that vanishing point is not on the canvas, not on the pictures, not on the drawing. Like, look at this picture right here. We have edges that want to converge this way and edges that want to converge that way, with an edge that's going straight down. So this looks like a normal background that's in a 2-point perspective. But if you were to follow these guidelines, you'd find the vanishing points outside of the picture, outside of the actual canvas. You see how that edge follows that guideline and that edge follows that guideline, leading to two different vanishing points. And connecting these two different vanishing points is a horizon line. That's where you will find whether the picture is showing more of the ground or more of the sky. Again, look at this image. We have that edge that goes that way, that edge that goes that way, and this edge that goes down, but not perfectly vertically down. This is a 3-point perspective. If we follow these edges, we find the vanishing points outside of the actual picture. You see how this edge follows that vanishing point, and that one, that vanishing point, and this one, this last vanishing point. And it makes sense for this picture drawing the horizon line connecting the two vanishing points at the bottom. That way, with the horizon line being at the bottom of the page, you see more of the sky. That's an exercise I want you guys to be doing. Get these background, get these pictures, and draw these horizon lines, vanishing points, and guidelines leading to these vanishing points. The more you do this exercise, the more this practice, the more understanding perspective turns from theory to actual intuition. You get to a point where you don't really need to plot down these vanishing points to draw these boxes in these guidelines. Another exercise I want you guys to be doing is what we've been doing the whole video, drawing these guidelines for these different point perspectives and drawing the box in these different point perspectives. Drawing the box being the best shape to see the dimensions that are attached to these vanishing points, that follow along these vanishing points. Then after that, I want you to spice it up. Draw other 3D shapes inside these boxes. You can draw other boxes inside the box. You can draw cones, pyramids inside the box. You can draw cylinders or even spheres. Just make sure with cylinders or spheres, whatever 3D object has a curved surface, draw contour lines so that you can see how curved this surface is. Now, this is an exercise that I want you guys to particularly focus on. We're gonna come back to this exercise. We're not done with perspective just yet. I want you guys to hit the subscribe button if you have not, to stay tuned as a member of the Double Empire. But for now, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to drop that like. God bless, and until next time, Double M out.